Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Welcome today to our Legal Women Voters at the ESU 9. We are delighted to be here, and they were so easy to work with. Janine had to leave, but she had everything set up for us. So thank you, first of all, to the ESU 9. Today our program is Civic Education in Nebraska. But first of all, before I do some introductions, we have a league statement that we read at each of our meetings, so I'd like to do that to begin with. The League of Women Voters of Nebraska is a nonpartisan, grassroots, civic organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not endorse individual political candidates or political parties. Membership in the League is open to people 16 years of older of all gender identities. So, as we begin, I'm delighted to introduce Bree Wilton, who was so excited to coming to talk to us because this is her home stomping grounds. Bree is from our State Department of Education. Her specialty is social studies education. And I'd like to introduce a couple of curriculum directors who are from our public schools. Table in the beautiful pink shirt is Shannon Neville from Adams Central Public Schools, and sitting next to her is Kristen Schlepka, and they're here to be our expert consultants about what's being done locally. Okay?
Experts might be.
You're more than 5 blocks from the school, so it counts, right? Okay. And so I'd like to introduce Bree Wilton, who's going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes on all the things, well, some of the things going on with social studies. And then she wants to make it interactive. So any questions you have or comments, and we'll be good to go.
Thank you. Hi everyone, just like she said, my name's Bree Wilton. I'm originally from Grand Island, so that's my local connection here. I graduated from Gish in the year 2000. Now you know how old I am, but maybe you have relatives. I played sports against Hastings, right? You guys were kind of a rival there with Kearney here in the Tri-City area, so it's great to be back, and I love being invited here to come talk to you in this beautiful building, and it's lovely that ESU 9 is hosting us today. We'll do a quick drive-by of the current state of civic education in Nebraska, and then I'd love to have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them, and I might punt to our local experts back here. I brought some hard copies of articles, but if you want a copy, this is kind of what I thought we'd do today here during our time. And if you would like to access this presentation, you sure can. If you happen to have a computer, it's easy to type in a tiny URL. Or if you have a phone, if you hold up your camera, you can scan that QR code, and then you'll have a copy of this presentation that has some links available to you of civic standards and state laws.
And I'm going to send that out to all our members.
Awesome. I'll give anybody a minute to get signed on here if you'd like to. A little about me. I have 2 daughters, Evie, who's 11, and Louise is 8. She's almost 9. She's 11, but I said she was 9. It's their Valentine's party today. So we've had a busy morning of loading up the big box, making sure we have the correct number of Valentines and making it to school on time. I live in La Vista, Nebraska, which is right outside of Omaha, so it was a nice drive down 980 here today. Beautiful sunny day. Okay, I did bring an infographic to kind of set the stage, and this is not new enough. It's from 2014, which feels like it's recent, but it's not that recent. And it talks about instructional time in social studies. Thank you. As a mother of young daughters, now I pay very close attention to what things they bring home in their book bags, right? And what I'm noticing with my own children in the district I used to teach in is they do social studies one week for maybe 20 minutes a day, and then science the next week, which is different from my experience of getting that weekly reader, right? That's one of my first memories. In first grade, I remember Gorbachev was on the cover of the weekly reader in that birthmark. And I remember thinking, this is cool. Like, I know current events. But it's just not happening time-wise as it did when I was in school. And that's because of assessment. Social studies, unlike English language arts and mathematics, is not assessed. It's not a part of the NSCAS, which is our statewide summative exam that's required by law, and it's not reflected in the MAP scores. MAP is one option for assessment that Hastings might use. Do you guys MAP? Okay, my kids MAP too. I like MAP. However, social studies does come in on those tests through reading, right? Social studies does, and this infographic does show that social studies increases gains in students' reading ability even more than strict ELA instructional time. So that's one of our issues now. I'm sure we're all here because we're concerned, right? What do students know? What are they being taught? What are they not being taught? Do they have the skills that they need to have to graduate and become good citizens, right? Let's do, I have some articles in here, but for 15 minutes, you can read those later if you want to. I also have hard copies, 10 hard copies if you want to take one home with you. Let's look at the state law 79724. Being the social studies specialist, there's lots of state laws that regulate social studies education, but this is one of our bigger ones. It's also known as the Civics law. And you can click on that there if you'd like to. I also brought copies, and this one I brought 20 copies of. A lot of times at the Department of Ed, we get questions, whether it's like, what curriculum should we adopt? We don't like to promote certain resources because then our job turns into a sales job. In Nebraska, we are what's considered a local control state, meaning that local school boards, local district representatives make those curricular decisions. We do help facilitate writing the standards, the state standards. And in social studies, that process is going on right now, so I'm a very busy girl with that process. We are hoping to get those approved by the State Board of Education this September. We started about 2 years ago on this, so it's been a long process. We're getting feedback from them, convening the writing team again to make suggestions to the social studies standards. But let's go back to 79724. The historian in me loves to look at the legislative website because you can see at the bottom when they created the law, when they changed the law, and there's a lot of history that goes on in that, right? If you see this law, you kind of can see it's reflective of, you know, the context of the environment at the time that the law is being written. I want to direct your first attention here to 1, because that's what dedicates it as a local control law. Okay, it says the school board of each school district shall, at the beginning of each calendar year, appoint from its members a committee of 3 to be known as the Committee on American Civics, which shall all these other things. So oftentimes I get questions. Just yesterday I got a call from a man in Stanton, Nebraska, and he wanted to know what textbooks students were using in Nebraska. Well, I don't have an answer for that because each district uses their own curriculum, their own materials that they would choose and adopt for their students. This committee holds that information. So anybody who has questions about curriculum could go to your school board's Committee on American Civics group that meets publicly twice a year and ask those questions. You can ask about instructional time at the elementary level. Would be a great question. If you look at our Nebraska social studies standards, they build the student skills progressively as they get older. And the lower level, I'll say K to 3, starts with myself and my school and my community, my neighborhood, in 2nd grade, and then you get into citywide and countywide government up until 4th grade, which is the big year for social studies, which is Nebraska history. Which, if you grew up here, you remember 4th grade, right? You did the trip to the Capitol? I hope so. That's like a very memorable experience. So that's why I shared this with you, is because it's a local control issue. This law was most recently amended in 2019. I could find the part. That's when they required high school graduates to do one of 3 things. That either have to take a version of the naturalization exam. And just know it says take, not pass. There are certain states like Texas where students have to pass that to graduate. Sometimes I get asked, the other option they can do is they can attend a public meeting and write a report on that. And the third option that they can do is write a report on these figures named in this law in subsection G. If you want to look at those. I get asked a question a lot. What are districts doing for that? I wish I knew. There's no reporting requirement to the state of Nebraska. I have no idea. I have a feeling through my casual observations that most districts are choosing the civics exam. When I taught Gov, that was what we did on the first day. Welcome to class. Let's see how you do. I did have one student ace it on the first day, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, Glenn, I'll never forget it. So most districts, from my assumption, are doing that. What version of that are they doing? I don't know. It was recently changed, I believe, in 2024 somewhat, but I don't know what they're doing for that. So that's how they changed the law. There's no reporting to the state. I have no answers for that. My answer, if anybody had a question, would be ask your committee on American civics, because that's where that reporting is supposed to happen. Sometimes I get asked detailed questions about what does this committee have to report? There's nothing in the law that tells me to tell them what to report. It's up to them what they ask and what they demand of their reports. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what I wanted to start here with is the civics law. That's what really governs civics in our state. This law was first written in 1948 and recently amended as recently as 2019. Currently, there's a bill, LB 1046, if anybody's paying attention, which I've gotten a lot of feedback on, to amend this to teach the dangers of communism, and that's right now is in committee. This bill already says that, if you read the bill. In subsection, interestingly, it points out you have to teach the dangers of communism and Nazism. Not fascism. If you taught government, you'd know it would be the opposite authoritarian system to communism. And so that's how that's dealt with now. We can look at civic standards if you'd like to. And this was our 2019 standards. I'll zoom because I know eyes. By law, every 7 years we revise standards in the area of English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. And right now, social studies is up. So we're kind of under the microscope here. As far as our suggested revisions at this point go, you will not see a lot of change from what you're looking at right now. You might see more specific language and indicators. We've been criticized for being too vague, for example, so maybe more specific language and indicators. You're going to see more streamlined task verbs that build upon each other. So let's just look at some of these lower level civic standards. And it tells how our standards are organized here. Here we are in kindergarten, forms and functions. You'll see that they're organized to forms and functions of government, civic participation. That comes in every single grade level. And then for the high school government standards, it's just 9 to 12. Okay, we don't do it per grade level after 8th grade. Civic participation, we're starting with citizenship skills. Some of this you'll see comes directly from that civics law that we just looked at. Communicate patriotic symbols, actions, that language is exactly in that civics law. We'll continue that in this round of revisions, just to make it clear for teachers what's expected of them by law to teach, right? President's Day is Monday, by the way, so I want to give those two a little shout out. Coming up here. We write standards in the area of civics, economics, geography, and history. At the high school level, we break down history into American history, and my favorite former subject to teach world history. Recently, we also now have financial literacy standards that we house into our economic standards. Students now have to also take a personal finance class to graduate high school. So we get to house those standards now too. Let's just look at a few more of the civics questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question about the law.
Okay.
And it's second page after G.
Okay.
The written test, the naturalization test, it says completion of 8th grade and again prior to the completion of 12th grade.
So they should be doing it within middle school as well.
As well?
Yes.
Okay.
I found a mistake in the civics law. Like a month ago, I was reading this and I thought, that doesn't make any sense. And I went through our lawyers and I was right, it didn't make any sense. It's not really true, but I thought either we're doing this wrong or this law's written wrong. Any other questions? Good question. I think if you want to ask a question of your local board, ask about that elementary instructional time. Is a great question to ask. That's not a teacher level decision. That's usually a district or administrator level decision who's setting that schedule for what that school day looks like. What also you're seeing, because it's so ELA heavy, is there's districts choosing different curriculums that try and maybe teach social studies through ELA, not the opposite. My old district uses CKLA, Core Knowledge Language Arts, which is really social studies heavy content, heavy content. My second grader Louise, came home talking about the War of 1812 in second grade, which is really cool, but they're supposed to be learning about their neighborhood, so don't tell me you're covering social studies standards by doing that. Okay? I love the content in CKLA. I wish it was more standards aligned for younger learners, because then they're missing some of those basic civil discourse, right? How we learn that in elementary school is very important. And some of that, in my opinion, just isn't happening anymore. I also think you might have elementary teachers somewhat scared to teach these topics, right? They don't feel like they've had the training in college to do this. They don't have the content expertise. Well, a program like CKLA lays it all out for them, and they don't need to do it. It's all right there for them. They can teach that content by using the materials given to them. So in some ways, we can also say social studies is a little scary. Resources might be not prioritized by a district or not adequately funded, so teachers are kind of scraping by on their own, which can be problematic for a number of reasons. What other questions do we have? I would also, and this is a side thing, but I think your multi-language learners, formerly known as ELL students, thrive in a social studies classroom, and that they're going to make great knowledge gains through learning that content. I used to see a ton of students who just moved weeks before, and just thrive in my classes because they have that world experience, I think, for one, but also they're making connections and growing in literacy in a social studies classroom. But that's outside of civics, but maybe not really, right?
Hi. More a comment maybe than a question that you can address. But I found when I was in elementary school that they did science and they did history or social studies every other week. That was the goal. They seldom got to it. And when they did, both those topics were scary for the teachers. They worried about any kind of questions they got because they have a little booklet. It was kind of like the weekly reader, only it was set up like you have here with your neighborhood and that kind of stuff. Fairly easy things. But the fear was one thing. And there was so much stuff they had to do and that interfered with the day and the kids going in and out of the classrooms that was why it got shelved. Any way to address that? They need your enthusiasm is what they need.
I appreciate that. Again, I would say ask that local decision maker who's prioritizing that instructional time. I think public schools were created to create good citizens, right? And so us leaving this as the last thing in the day, right, that's an afterthought, is a really bad thing, in my opinion. But the Nebraska Department of Ed doesn't have any political opinions. That would be I have to be careful there. I'm glad you're all here. I think there's a lot of good questions that we can ask. I think that it's a really tough time right now to be a teacher in a lot of ways. You're seeing a lot of turnover with education, right? In certain areas more than others. Social studies is the second least though, because we're so much fun to teach. Physical education has been the least impacted in Nebraska right now. Social studies is the second. Special education is the most impacted area. And I would also say as a social studies teacher, they're being impacted by the SPED shortage in that we used to have a co-teacher often in the classroom to help with students with individual educational plans. Though that support's often now being pulled maybe to the areas of English or mathematics, where students might specifically struggle in certain areas and are also assessed. So other teachers are feeling that as well. Bella.
What kind of difficulties do boards run into purchasing textbooks to match what you have up there?
Great question, and I would say very little. Our standards have been praised by some other statewide leaders in that they're not so specific and don't tie you to a certain resource. Other state standards like South Dakota's are very specific and very not aligned to most resources. And by resources, I'll just say textbook manufacturers, okay? Therefore, South Dakota's legislature pays for their materials that are tailored, created specific to South Dakota standards. Nebraska's probably not going to do that at any point soon, would be my guess, especially with our budget shortfalls. Good question. And so that's where the question of how specific do we write these? The benefit of having a specific standard is if I'm a rural teacher, right? There's a lot of, Monday, I'm ESU 13, that's in Scottsbluff. I will have 25 teachers in there. My guess would be 20 of them will teach 7 to 12 social studies. They have every kid in that high school. They're the only social studies teacher there. So for those teachers, imagine being a new teacher in that district where you've got nobody to reach out to. A more specific standard might be helpful. And in Nebraska, that's where we have these 4 examples. So the standard indicators, for example, this is not required by law. This is. These are merely curricular suggestions. Here's what you could do with this if your local district or administration deems that appropriate for your learners. So when we get board hopeful approval here in September, they will not be voting on these 4 examples because those are suggestions. They would be voting on standard indicators. And we also try and build these verbs up. So at the lower levels, you'll see lots of identify, explain. At the higher level, that should turn more into an analyze, compare, building up on that depth of knowledge for the student task. But we also recognize like 5th grade's their first U.S. history. So then we'll start again with understand, explain the lower DOK, and build it up again at 8th grade when they have more U.S. history. Again, in high school when they have more U.S. history. You'll see those skills hopefully build upon each other. Yes?
On the SS111A, on the examples, classroom rules, playground rules, etc. When your child comes home and they said, oh, you say, did you learn anything about civics today or government? And they'll say no. But if you ask them, well, what are your classroom rules? Oh yeah, we made them, because it's not a good idea for the teacher to just make them, because then that would be one person making them and they wouldn't fit everybody. So we all make them together and we negotiate our classroom rules and we vote on it. And they don't understand that that's democracy at work and government at work.
Isn't it sneaky? I love it.
How do we get teachers to say, we're going to make our classroom rules and it's going to be a lesson in how democracy works? And then how do we get our kids to come home and say, we made our classroom rules and that's democracy in action when we all get a say and we all get to talk about the rules and then we get to vote on them, because it really isn't a good idea if our teacher just makes all the rules and puts them up, because that would be like a monarch government or something of that sort. How do we get, people just don't understand that civics and government is taught in a lot of different ways by a lot of different teachers on a lot of different days. How do we get that message out?
I think that's a great point that you're making. I think maybe the teacher doing that classroom management as they're viewing it doesn't even realize what they're doing is building that classroom environment. I was able to go to elementary schools in Boston Public Schools in November and see a 1st grade classroom. And if you know anything about Massachusetts education, they're like very happy, and they really invest in elementary social studies. And I mean, it almost brought tears to my eyes, where they had phrases on the wall. I agree with you, but I disagree with you because, right? And what the students were doing was they saw a picture of a mess in the cafeteria. And the students were asked, how do we find out how to take care of this, what the problem was, and how to deal with it? So that's the level of social studies they were doing. And they were reading books that go along with that, and they were sharing, and using these words that were on the wall, and I thought that's really good social studies, right? But a lot of districts maybe don't prioritize that time for that. I don't think I gave you an answer, but I'm not sure if there's one.
I didn't really expect an answer, but it's democracy and government is being taught in a lot of different ways at a lot of different grade levels on a lot of different days, and it's just not coming across as that's what we're doing.
And I suppose we get feedback perhaps that we're not building enough. There's a discussion in social studies, right? Content versus action, right? Do students need to know 1776, right? And these certain facts and figures? Certainly. But what do they do with that, right? And so I think that's the good question, is it has to be a nice balance of both. A lot of the public feedback we received on these standards was against, they called it action civics. Okay, they didn't want that phrase action civics in our standards. Because I think there's this belief that teachers are out there, right, giving kids these protest signs saying, this is what you need to do, right?
You should be.
And if you really know how you've seen that happening with students on the sidewalk for sure. So I think that sometimes teachers are accused of brainwashing, I guess is the word that they're being used, when really we're teaching students how to think, not what to think. Yes?
But labeling's important, and naming things are important so that they know, because we're hearing a lot of different names being thrown out there for systems of government, and people don't seem to understand what they are.
We definitely have a lot of standards. If you look at, I think, 7.11b, I had to write feedback to LB
But down to the
1046.
elementary level, saying that it's a participatory government that we have in our classroom, and these are the ways that we're going to use, and then labeling as a democracy, and even maybe equating it to we're a republic, a democratic republic, and this is kind of what we do. And they're going to vote on class presidents and things like that too.
And that should come up within our 5th grade standards. 5th grade's like colonization to early America. You would, I hope, see that as they're developing the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, naming those names and those terms as they are. We also received a lot of public input, though, that the word democracy we don't want included in our standards.
Yeah, and I was going to say, when I saw the health standards, the big thing there is they didn't want labels on anything. So, and I was like, if you don't give them the words, they can't talk about it.
Believe it or not, even the science standards and math standards have also become political, so you can imagine what's on right now with these social studies standards. Yes, but I just believe we do what's right for students and teachers in Nebraska and teach students how to think, the skills to be good citizens, right? 100% of our students, they go through our schools to become citizens, if you think about that, right? Special education students, citizens. High achieving athletes, still citizens. And so giving students these skills of knowing how to make change that they see fit, as best they see fit, giving them the tools to do so should be the goal.
What is your thinking on how free of federal government thinking this is? As I looked at the 3rd page here where it talks about Martin Luther King and Native American Heritage Day, that's certainly been questioned recently.
I did receive a lot of questions early on in this administration about that, and in Nebraska we also have a different law called 79719. This is the multicultural education law that was passed in 1993 that mandates all K-12 content areas teach the contributions of African Americans, Latino Americans, all the different racial groups, but it doesn't get into different gender identities. So we have that supporting state law.
Jody, did you lose your question?
I have a question that I'm not in education, so I hope this makes sense. But I'm in workforce development, and so I know are there any school districts in Nebraska or across the country that incorporate social studies with career pathway learning?
So Omaha Public Schools is the biggest district in our state, serving about 60,000 students, and they have mandated social studies every day. They are formerly known as having the magnet school, high school. You're perhaps familiar. Omaha North was the math school, still kind of is. They now call them career pathway schools. None of them that I can see are directly tied to social studies per se, but isn't everything kind of tied to social studies per se? So I hope that helps answer your question. There are a lot of states doing something called SEALs, S-E-A-L. We have a biliteracy language seal that you've maybe heard of. A lot of states have civic seals. It's not controversial, though, what would get a student to get this civic seal. It would be like a Hallmark seal kind of on their diploma, saying that they've met certain benchmarks to determine that they get this seal. Tennessee's an interesting one. It's mandated through their governor's office that schools can get a school civic seal. So they might have certain programs available, certain volunteer hour requirements, different things that students or the school might have to do. I would say maybe under 20 states have some sort of civic seal program, and like in education, no 2 states look the same with that. I was really enthused about the idea of a civic seal and came back and pitched it, and schools don't want that. They feel that as an unfunded mandate. The guidance people are already overwhelmed. Who would be keeping track of these volunteer hours was the kind of feedback that I got, so I knew I'd be busy enough with standards and I walked away from that one. What other questions do you have? Hey.
Did I hear you say that the finance test and teaching goes under social studies?
So because by law, we're one of the 4 subject areas that has to have standards, and we get economics, we also now have financial literacy. And the state law, which is, I should know that number, they define financial literacy with like 6 specific skills students should know. But then they also said they can take a financial literacy or a personal finance class, and they didn't define personal finance. So it's pretty clear as mud. Students have to pass that class to graduate between 9th and 12th grade. But also in K-8 instruction, there are financial literacy standards that they should meet, like wants versus needs, that would start at those type, trade-off kind of thing. It does cross over a lot into economics. It's very confusing though, because a lot of times districts will think they can do economics and personal finance together, and it's hard to hit all those standards in one semester, is my answer. But it's ultimately a local control decision. Good question. It feels weird. I also work with our CTE, that's like the STEM side of the Department of Ed, with financial literacy. Bella.
Knowing parliamentary procedure is often necessary if you're going to be involved in local governmental things. To what is that taught in this classroom? I mean, there are some organizations such as FFA and FBLA who probably do a good job with that. But for all students, is that part of their classroom curriculum?
Well, I can't speak to what happens in every Nebraska classroom by any means. I don't think much parliamentary procedure is being taught at the high school level. I love to second that motion though. But my mom, there used to be groups that you could take tests in parliamentary procedures. Yeah. I run a scholarship called the United States Youth Senate Program, and when people put that they won those, it's like, oh, you're at the top of my list now. Some students, Lincoln East is very strong in that. Lincoln East, that's being taught, I can tell you that. Different high schools are known for better civics than others. And that's just kind of, I know that now from my role. Johnson Brock, Auburn, very strong in civics. Kearney, very strong in civics. So it kind of maybe just depends on where you are and the priorities. And maybe it means one teacher's doing all that work too.
Could we ask locally or experts?
I was gonna say, are we strong on
With teaching that, I could not speak of that directly.
How strong are we with civics, teaching civics in our curriculum?
I feel like at our school, especially like in the elementaries, that we really are hitting those very well. Starting in 5th grade, we transitioned where that they have social studies every day. And for that, I know that was a big shift that we started doing. But I think that we are doing a really good job when it comes to just teaching those skills with an elementary classroom. I think we probably lack labeling those skills and using the correct terminology when it comes to that. I mean, that was a good observation, or good comment by you by stating that, because that's probably not something that we're doing a great job of explicitly saying this is part of this under the civic standards.
And you see me look to Shannon. I am the new director of learning at Hastings Public Schools, and so I am learning the landscape. But I will tell you, it's been helpful when I present to our board that we have a civics committee. We've met once, we meet again in a few weeks. And they're asking the very questions that you're asking about the curriculum, about standards alignment, about the resources, about the instructional time. And that's important too, because we're engaging in that curiosity and how are we meeting all learners' needs. We also do things like our district right now is working on standards alignment for all content areas. So all content areas from math, English, PE, social studies, science, looking at what we're teaching, what resources, and is it aligned to our grade level expectations? Are we providing all learners, multilingual, those with disabilities, your general education, do all of them have access to at grade level material and instruction? And in that process, that helps us make decisions about the instructional time, what we purchase for materials. So we're constantly doing that. I also want to bring up, just so that there's an awareness of pressure points. So when you're talking about the time dedicated in math and the time dedicated in reading, you need to read so you can read to learn. So reading, there's a lot of priority, and even statewide with the Nebraska Literacy Project, a lot of initiatives and pressure points for us to increase literacy skills. And ELA and math are both content areas that we test, have a summative test, we report to the state. As districts, we are federally rated, we are state classified, there are ways that we are measured as a district, and a lot of the data with which they're using to measure our students, our student performance data, is math and ELA. So when you question, well, what about science? What about social studies? I'm a former science teacher. I have a lot of passion about how much are we teaching them how to think and then utilizing the content to help them do that and make sense of the world around them, that things aren't so siloed, that when you're doing class rules, you are doing a democratic process. We want more of that. We're trying as best as we can as districts in a system where we have some pressure points of where we can fund, where we can put in certain resources, and a lot of it comes to testing.
And the Nebraska Department, one of the things the Nebraska Department of Ed does through federal law is rate schools. It's called the AQuest, A-Q-U-E-S-S-T. There's the one double letter in that, but I'm not sure which one it is.
It's a T, you were good.
Thank you. It's a cool chart that they use, but it's very complex on how these schools get these exceptional, good, very good, or needs improvement ratings, but testing is a big portion of that. And so schools obviously prioritize that because they don't want to get a bad grade, make bad press, and look like a bad school as a result. So it's kind of a catch-22 there.
Another thing too is like we focus on a lot of the Patriotism Act, and so like something in my level as being a district-wide level is like I have there's certain holidays, certain things in Nebraska that we have to celebrate and teach our kids, in ways that I check that is also having them recorded. So I can pull it up and I know exactly what kindergarten's doing when it comes to Constitution Day. And then it goes to our music department and our art department, and then they tell me exactly how they're teaching those specific holidays that NDE has required us to teach. And so I think that's always a good thing when you just have that quick and easy accountability where we don't have the testing, but we still are ensuring that it's being taught. And then I'd also kind of like to pinpoint is when we are talking about the interdisciplinary teachings, some curriculums do a better job than others, but I do feel like getting our kids to learn how to read and learning science and social studies within that is huge. And so we're incorporating a lot more of the co-disciplinary in that aspects, where we used to just be like, oh, we're learning about Sam the pig. Instead, now we're learning about Sam and his community and his housing and his families. So I feel like we're doing a much better job, and that comes down to the textbook resources that are finally being able to be provided to us with that.
And Bree, I have a quick question, because I reached out to Shannon and I wanted to see her list of resources for Constitution Day, Martin Luther King. Yes, and Hastings Public has theirs, but I wanted to review it and refine it. And do we do Malcolm X Day as well or not?
That was a law passed last year nothing changed as far as our standards or any requirements for district staff. The law is written that they have an opportunity to learn about the contributions of Malcolm X to the civil rights movement, which I think we had before the law was passed.
Okay.
So there's a good national resource on him.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you a question about getting your resources. How do you choose textbooks? What kinds of criteria do you have from the local school board to say, you know, this is acceptable because we're changing so many things in the libraries and so forth? What's considered acceptable now because we're trying, in some instances, we're rewriting history?
Math, reading, and science is definitely easier when it comes to that because there's a national report called Ed Reports. And so when we were getting some extra resources through COVID funds, one of the things that most school districts in Nebraska decided to do was that our curriculum had to meet the Ed Report checkpoints to ensure that fidelity across districts, across schools. And so I know Adams Central adopted in the reading, math, and then some of the science using those ed reports.
Who makes those reports?
Like the federal government does. You probably can speak of that more, of ed reports.
Yeah, Ed Reports actually hires educators.
Yes,
They are hired to vet
there's-
an entire.
Is that through the Department of Education?
It's
Which is-
this is
It's
national.
I think,
Oh, well, what is national? Do we,
Ed
aren't we
reports.
No,
trying to
it's
do
private, it's
away
private.
with the?
so they're criticized for being.
I guess
funders.
the reach is national.
Yes,
But
It's a thing right now in English language arts, math, and science where they actually give red light, green light, yellow light to different materials. They've been on the website. There's no social studies of that happening yet, and my guess would be it wouldn't happen because it's so political.
But I will tell you the process. And a lot of times districts will reach out to their service unit because they have someone that has that emphasis. So I did it for Home Central or assisted with science, in that you bring your teachers together and you create a vision for instruction, like your core beliefs as to what is valued in this district for your content area instruction. Then you take a look at ed reports as an example, not the example. You decide of publishers that exist currently that they are promoting are high quality instructional materials, that's called HQIM, and that they are user friendly, they are relevant, and they are for the most part standards based to a number of states in the nation. So for math and ELA, a lot of the core, Common Core. And so you pull what is considered, quote unquote, high quality. Then you bring those publishers, their materials in front of all of your teachers. Their teachers, I like this process too, they determine which rubric, because there's a lot of rubrics that are provided. They choose the rubric with which to rate the materials. Then they do the rating process and basically go to the democratic process of coming to a consensus as to what they feel based on their vision of instruction, their rubric that they chose, what reports are out there. And as curriculum directors, we also ask other districts, what has been your experience with this publisher and these materials? But then it always comes down to, there is no perfect curriculum. When you purchase and you have this package, a lot of times the packages today, regardless of the content, it's we provide, but it's the instructor that decides. And it's really helpful to have a lot of the we provide, because we have students, spectrum of learners, that we have to differentiate for, scaffold for, help them access the grade level material. There's a lot of skill sets. So it's nice to have that package, and then the instructor who's gone through the process of, they know their vision, they know the state standards, they will do their own alignment for Nebraska. And that is a hefty load for an educator. But that's the process with which, we expect our teachers to work through.
Yeah, we do that for every curriculum, whether it's art, math, science, physical education, that's the same process that we follow. Yep.
I'm married to a teacher and I have a teacher. Okay, if there's not any, I'd like to ask you about that's the LB 1050 that's talking about third grade.
Third grade retention? I know very little about it.
I know,
I think it's one of the few the Department of Ed is taking a position on
they are taking a position.
against it.
A lot of organizations are,
Okay,
the research is
okay,
overwhelming.
I just wanted to talk to you. Is that your comment on it?
The girl next to me works in early literacy, so I hear about it when she's on Zooms. Other states have adopted laws that are called third grade retention laws. A lot of studies say that if students aren't meeting milestones, aren't proficient by third grade, they're at risk for not graduating. Strong connections there. I don't know who proposed the bill, but a well-intentioned person proposed this bill. And the department, from my understanding, has seen problems with it and are trying to negotiate, to try and express what they see as problems in it right now while it's in committee.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of literacy laws regarding up to third grade. I think there was money behind it where they provided supplemental instruction over the summer for students who weren't identified as being proficient, and that's still happening.
Didn't we track reading skills and test that out some time ago in Nebraska?
I'm not sure what your question is.
The reading skills. Wasn't that something that we really had an emphasis on at one time, not too long ago?
Well, we have to write individual reading plans
Okay,
for
that's
every
what I
kid,
thought.
kindergarten through third
Right,
grade, that is not
that was a
proficient.
result of that.
Yes, yes.
So my guess is the retention bill is kind of in line with that literacy bill. I don't know what will happen with it. Good question. Thank you all for coming. I won't say Hastings like I would have when I was 18. This was lovely. I'd love to come back anytime, and I hope that I answered questions or cleared anything up, or I'm an email away if you ever have any questions. Our standards public input survey will be around early this summer, is my hope. I'm working on it right now. So if you have any feedback about our standards, I would love to hear it. Even if you're supportive of the standards, that's good to know, because sometimes all you hear is the hate. And so thanks for having me, and thanks for being good citizens.
Thank you, Bree. Also, thank you to Shannon and Kristen for taking a little time away from your job at school.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
That's nice to meet you.
Wow.
It's a big job.